Be quiet. So I can just share. Presentation's gone again. Team, the presentation's not here. Clicked on it. Mm-hmm. Click on it first. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandra Zuniga. I'm with the Consular Section here at U.S. Embassy Hanoi. And today we're going to do a student visa presentation, pretty much going over some basic details as to what you need to know to apply for a U.S. student or exchange visitor visa. We're going to mostly talk about the pre-departure process, give you a few tips, and then talk a little bit about, for those of you that have maybe gone through this process before, what post-arrival looks like and what the renewal process would look like in the future. So to go ahead and get started, we actually want to share with all of you this video that we created at the Consular Section. And the video pretty much goes over a couple of the key myths that we tend to hear very often. People hear about the visa process for the US. I'm sure all of you have at least one thing that you've heard about how US visas go or what might be required of you. And sometimes those things just aren't true. So hopefully this video will give you a bit of an idea about some things that you may have heard as a rumor. And the actual reality of how we look at visas and the visa process. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and share with all of you this video first, and then we'll go ahead and start with the presentation. So bear with me one second while I go ahead and share my screen so that we can look at this video together. Okay, and can you see it? Hold on one second. We're just going to make sure that we share the screen with all of you here. It's actually sharing. To me, it says it's sharing. I can't. Hold on. Okay, can you see it now? Because we just shared it. You can see it?
Hoa Kỳ không giới hạn số lượng visa du học, du lịch và công tác ngắn hạn. Chúng tôi cấp visa cho mọi đương đơn xin visa du học, du lịch và công tác có đủ điều kiện được cấp visa.
Oh no.
Chúng tôi quan tâm đến việc trao đổi trực tiếp với bạn hơn là xem xét giấy tờ trong buổi phỏng vấn. Nếu bạn bị phát hiện mang theo giấy tờ giả, bạn có thể bị từ chối visa vĩnh viễn. Anh đã bao giờ bị từ chối visa Mỹ chưa?
Nếu mà nói thật đi, không được cấp visa đâu, không được nói dối.
Bạn cần trả lời thành thật trong buổi phỏng vấn. Nếu cố tình nói dối viên chức lãnh sự, bạn sẽ không được cấp visa và có thể sẽ bị từ chối visa vĩnh viễn.
Mẹ ơi, nhà mình có họ hàng ở Mỹ không?
Có chứ con. Anh chị em họ của mẹ đều ở Cali. Rồi thì các chú, các bác của bố con nữa cũng đang ở Texas này.
Mỗi ngày, chúng tôi cấp visa cho hàng trăm đương đơn có họ hàng tại Hoa Kỳ. Quyết định cấp visa dựa trên hoàn cảnh của bản thân bạn, chứ không phải dựa trên các mối quan hệ họ hàng. Tuy việc đã từng đi nước ngoài có thể giúp củng cố hồ sơ xin visa của bạn, nhưng chúng tôi đưa ra quyết định cấp visa dựa trên toàn bộ hoàn cảnh của đương đơn, chứ không chỉ dựa trên một yếu tố duy nhất là các chuyến đi nước ngoài trước đó. Bất kỳ đại sứ quán hay lãnh sự quán Hoa Kỳ nào trên thế giới đều có thể truy cập vào hồ sơ visa và chi tiết buổi phỏng vấn của bạn. Do đó, nếu bạn xin cấp lại visa nhưng hoàn cảnh của bạn không có gì thay đổi thì kết quả vẫn như vậy. chị phải trả lời như thế này này, đừng trả lời như thế kia, biết chưa? Bạn chính là người chịu trách nhiệm với thông tin trong đơn xin visa của mình. Visa của bạn nhiều khả năng sẽ bị từ chối nếu bạn không nắm rõ nội dung trong hồ sơ hoặc sử dụng các giấy tờ giả mạo do công ty du lịch hoặc đơn vị môi giới visa cung cấp.
Tại sao em lại muốn học thạc sĩ? Bằng cấp càng cao thì cơ hội xin việc càng dễ. Tại sao em lại chọn học ở Mỹ?
Vì Mỹ có hệ thống giáo dục tốt nhất trên thế giới. Chúng tôi sẽ thấy bạn không đáng tin cậy nếu bạn trả lời dập khuôn hoặc không thành thật. Bạn nên trả lời rõ ràng và trung thực về hoàn cảnh và mục đích chuyến đi của mình. Tại sao lần trước anh lại ở Mỹ quá thời gian được phép? Chúng tôi không nhận hối lộ dưới mọi hình thức. Nếu bạn cố tình đưa hối lộ, visa của bạn sẽ bị từ chối và điều này ảnh hưởng nghiêm trọng đến hồ sơ xin visa của bạn trong tương lai.
Okay, so now that we've finished that video, we're going to go ahead and go back to our actual presentation for today. So hopefully all of you enjoyed that video and it taught you a little bit something in terms of how we look at visas and also visa applicants. To get started, I want to once again share with you the link to the video in case you're interested or didn't get to see all of it today. And then I also want to remind folks that we will be trying to take some questions at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to write your question down while we're going through the presentation on Facebook, okay? So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the pre-departure process, which is for most people what it looks like to actually apply for a US visa. So first, the basic question to get us started, how do you actually apply? So in order to actually apply for a US visa, we have a very simple process. Of course, you have to first be admitted to an approved school or a designated exchange program, depending on whether you're applying for an F visa or a J visa. If you're going to apply for an F student visa, then you'll ultimately need to receive something that's called an I-20, and you will receive that from a school. If you're going to do an exchange program, then you're looking at probably a J visa, and that will have a different kind of form that's called the DS 2019. So after you've applied to a school or an exchange program, you'll have one of these forms. And once you have these, then you are kind of ready for the next step. What comes next is you have to pay something called the SEVI fee. The SEVI fee is pretty much what we're looking at for you to apply for an F student visa, an M student visa, or a J exchange visa. The current SEVI fee is about $350 and you pay it entirely online. So you can actually take a look at the website that we've linked right there, which is www.fmjfee.com. Once you've paid your SEVI fee, then you're going to go over to ustraveldocs.com and actually complete the application process that we will then see in the consular section. You'll also have to actually pay for the visa processing fee, and you'll need to make an appointment. And again, I want to make sure that we all have it very clear that you're paying for the fee to process the visa. It's not a fee for the visa itself, but it's just for us to look at your case and actually interview you. And then, of course, once you've gone through those 3 steps, you're going to actually make an appointment and interview at either the US Embassy in Hanoi or our Consulate General in Ho Chi Minh City, depending on where you're making your appointment. So what do you actually need? There's specific required documentation that we're expecting you to have with you and to have ready by the time that you're applying. So of course, the most important one is a valid passport. And the most important things to consider is we're trying to ensure that your passport is at least valid for 6 months beyond your intended period of stay in the United States. And you must also have at least 2 blank visa pages so that we can actually put a visa on your passport. We'll also want to make sure that you have paid the visa processing fee, the visa application fee, which we call the MRV. So we'll want to see that receipt. You'll also need to have the DS-160 confirmation page, a color photograph, and it has to have been taken within the last 6 months on a white background. And this is something that we've been seeing a lot quite often. It needs to be without eyeglasses, and it must also not be retouched. You really must ensure that your photo is not retouched. We have seen some photos and you can tell that there's been a little bit of retouching. We have to send those back. We also, of course, as I mentioned before, need your I-20 and your DS-2019 forms, and then any other supporting documents that you feel that you need to have with you. And when we're talking about the supporting documents, those really will come in handy when you're actually doing your interview. And this is a question that we get very often. We always get asked, what do I need to provide, or what am I trying to prove when I'm interviewing? So of course, we want to ensure that you have actually been accepted to a school and a program and that you are actually going to study in the US. We also want to understand, what is your plan of study? Why do you want to go and study in the US? And what are you planning to do after you finish studying? We need to make sure that you are able to prove that you have enough money or funds to afford going to school in the US. And we, of course, need to ensure that you either have sufficient English ability to complete a program of study in the US, or in some cases, we do see this, that the school is aware of any difficulties that you may have when it comes to English, and they're prepared and able to assist you in studying English. And of course, one thing that's really important for us is also, do you intend to return to Vietnam after your program? Do you have actual long-term plans to return to Vietnam? So then what happens right after? If your visa is approved, then we need to check that you are within 120 days of your program start date. I'm sorry, I'm going to take a little sip of water so that I can continue talking a little bit. We're not able to issue visas more than 120 days before the program start date or after a program start date has already passed. When it comes to you and what you should do with your visa, students and exchange visitors also can't enter the US more than 30 days before the program start date. And when we say program start date, we are really going by what is in your I-20 form or on the online system for the SEBI program, okay? And of course, we are always going to remind you that you need to present either your I-20 form or the DS-2019 to an official at a point of entry in the US. And we expect that, of course, if you are issued a US visa, that you will follow all US laws as applicable to you as a student and, of course, as a non-immigrant visitor. Oftentimes we get asked, what happens if I get denied a US visa? If that happens, it really will depend on the parameters under which you were denied, but more often than not, you can reapply. That said, if you are denied a US visa, and you do want to reapply, we really recommend that you show new information about your situation, that you really are prepared to explain to us what has changed or what may be something that the other previous officer that interviewed you missed about your situation and how you meet the parameters that have been previously discussed about what we're looking for. One of the things that we really want to make sure student applicants know is that more documents does not equal new information. So if the only thing that you are bringing to your interview is one more document, then that probably doesn't really qualify as having new information. And you may want to consider whether you have enough of a case to reapply or if you need to wait. As you saw in the video, don't visa shop. We can see all prior cases from anywhere in the world, and we can see when you apply to multiple different places in a very short period of time. So having talked a little bit about what we expect and what you can expect at the actual before you interview, I want us to talk a little bit about interview tips and what we're looking at when you're actually doing the interview itself. So let's talk a little bit about tips for a successful interview. One of the big things, of course, is the easiest one that you can do, and it's know your application. You are the person that's interviewing. As an officer and other fellow officers, we will not know your case. We are looking to you to help us understand your case, your reasons for going to the US, why you chose the school that you chose, and we're really looking to interview you and understand the case that you're presenting to us. Hand in hand with that, you should stay calm, tell the truth, and of course be specific. This is something that happens quite often. People can get really nervous. We know that you may be nervous coming to interview, and we understand that. Answer the question that you are asked. A lot of times people get so nervous that they just answer any question that first comes to mind and not the question that they've been asked. Definitely try to take a moment and answer the question that you are asked, because that will really help us. And we also have a very limited amount of time to look at your case and the cases that come right after you. So the more specific that you are able to be in answering the question that you're asked, the better that we're able to look at your case. Make sure that you know your program. Why do you like it? Why is it good for you? You are the applicant and you probably applied to a lot of different schools. So why do you actually want to go to this one school as opposed to any others? Or why was this exchange program different from anything else that you had considered doing? This is a really important question for us because we're trying to understand, we're trying to hear from you and just really understand what you've been thinking about in terms of your study plans or in terms of how you went about choosing the right school for you. And then the last tip is schedule early for your interview appointment. For us, it's usually spring and summer are peak student visa seasons because we have a lot of students that may have come back and are trying to apply for visa renewals, or we have a lot of students that are going for the first time for fall semester and spring semester. So we tend to see a lot of appointments and a lot of people that tend to apply during that time. Of course, right now, under COVID-19, we understand that we've had some limited appointments, but we still do have appointments available. So if you are looking to interview, make sure that you are planning enough time ahead to book your appointment. We did put this information here, although it may not really apply. As I mentioned, we do have interview slots available for a lot of days. But we do have something called the expedited interview appointment. And that really applies for students and exchange students that are within 60 days of their program start date. In order to request an expedited interview, you first have to book a regular appointment. So if you are able to find a regular appointment that is within the amount of time that you need to actually make it to the US by your program start date as noted in your I-20, then you should be just fine. But if for some reason you're not able to get an appointment in time that you need to ensure that you can get to the US for your program start date and to start school, then after you've booked a regular appointment, you may just be able to send us more information and see if you may be eligible for an expedited appointment. But again, right now we're seeing that students are able to book the appointments that they need and ensure that they have plenty of time to actually make it to the US to start their program. Still, we just provide this information for you to have. So we've talked a little bit about what we're expecting from you, the tips for a successful interview, what happens if you need an expedited interview. And now we want to talk a little bit about something more serious. And you saw a little bit in our video about student visa fraud or just visa fraud in general. So what is visa fraud? Visa fraud is an attempt to acquire a visa, sometimes through the use of fraudulent documents or misrepresented information. A lot of time what that means is people may be trying to provide at the visa window fake documents, and this could range widely from birth certificates to fake school transcripts. But visa fraud also has a much darker side to it, which can also look as trafficking and smuggling of people. And it can also look like misusing your visa once you have it in the US. So this could be employment on a B1, B2, or unauthorized employment as a student. So you want to make sure that you understand your own documents and your own visa application, and that above all things, you are presenting yourself credibly and authentically. And part of why we say this is because there are very scary consequences to visa fraud. It's not that you just come to the embassy and if you provided a fake document or misrepresented information, that's where it ends. The reality is that applicants who present fraudulent documents or misleading statements at the visa window and in their applications could be subject to permanent ineligibilities for future US visas. What that means is that in those cases, you may not be eligible for a visa to the US ever again. Similarly, any individuals who knowingly assist in fraudulent activities are also subject to the same permanent ineligibilities for future US visas. So it's a very serious topic, and it's something that we take very seriously. And we explain to people all the time that you should be presenting yourself authentically, be yourself, present your information in a truthful manner. And you will find that it's a much easier process that way. And of course, the last point that I want to make sure that is very clear when we're talking about visa fraud, we're not just talking about the permanent ineligibility either. Organizations, including travel agencies or other agencies that assist in fraudulent visa activities, are referred to host government law enforcement. So these kinds of cases could end up actually being referred to police officers or actually having a legal law enforcement investigation. So now that we've discussed a little bit of that part of the process and why it's so important to be truthful and to use your visa appropriately, let's talk a little bit about what happens after. So let's assume that you put together all your documents, you're ready to go to school, you have a visa on hand, and now you've arrived in the US. So what happens now? This is probably really important because students mostly go to the US for multiple years, either 2 to 4 year programs, if not more, if you're doing multiple levels of education in the US, from high school to college, to a master's program, to a PhD. So it's important for people to understand that visa validity is not the same as visa status. So visa validity is the time in which you can travel to the United States and request admission. So that's the amount of time that your visa is valid. For Vietnam citizens, your visa is usually valid for 1 year. So what that means is when you come and interview and get approved for a visa and we print that visa and put it on your passport, that visa will have dates there that will last for a full year. However, that's not the same as visa status, especially for students. So in the case of students, after your student visa expires, if you were in the US at that time and have maintained student status, then you can generally remain in the US for as long as you're still an active student and meeting all of the F1 visa requirements, all of the requirements of your visa. However, let's say that your visa has already expired and you left the US and came to Vietnam for a holiday or a special occasion. If you have to then re-enter, you'll have to reapply for a visa. And there's different ways to do that. You can either do that in person, or if your visa expired within a certain amount of time, you may be able to do that by mailbox renewal. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's just important for you to understand how long is your visa actually good for, and then how long you can stay in the US are actually quite different. One is based on just how long your visa is good for and valid, and the other one is really a question for people at the point of entry, for officers at the port of entry, and also depending on your specific circumstances and situation and how long you actually have been given permission to be in the US to complete your program. So what should you do once you arrive in the US? So remember, we discussed that you should not arrive to the US more than 30 days before your program start date in your I-20. So as soon as you arrive in the US, you're going to want to contact your designated school official when you enter the US. your designated school official or your DSO is the person at your university or institution that is actively helping helping you put together your I-20s, keeping that updated, and ensuring that your status is kept updated for the SEVI system. So when you arrive at school, you're going to want to contact them to let them know that you've arrived. And you're going to want to make sure that you do that no later than the program start date that's listed in your Form I-20, or because of COVID-19 right now, no later than the program start date listed officially in your electronic record, okay? This is really important, and the DSO is actually quite an important person for you, and you'll probably be talking to them quite often. So keep that term in mind because you're going to see it quite a few times in this presentation. So how do you actually maintain visa status? Remember, we talked about that, the difference between how long your visa is good for, but then actually your status in the US. While studying in the US, we're expecting you to be a student. That's the whole reason why you're going to the US on a student visa. So in order to maintain visa status and active student status, you're going to need to make sure that you attend and pass all your classes. If you find when you arrive in the US that school is too difficult, or maybe you took on too many courses, please make sure that you speak with your designated school official, your DSO, as soon as possible. Keep them informed, keep them aware of your situation, because there are specific requirements in terms of course of study and how many, and your course load that you need to maintain to actually have active visa status. If for any reason you enter the US and you've been going to school and completing every single year and you're doing fine, but then something happens and you don't think you'll be able to complete your program by the end date on your Form I-20, then you're going to want to talk to your DSO again and ensure that they're aware so that they can get you the appropriate extensions or anything that's required to ensure that you don't lose student status in the US and can complete your program. You must also take a full course of study each term. You must be able to study full time in order to maintain visa student status. So if for any reason you are not able to study full time, to do a full course load to show that you are attending school full time, then you're going to need to contact your DSO immediately, because it's possible then that you could fall out of status. And that's why the next point is also really important. Don't drop a class without first speaking with your DSO, because sometimes, in some cases, you may be taking just enough classes, just enough credits to have full student status in the US. And so if you drop one, then you could fall out of status. So pretty much the summary to all of this is to maintain visa status, we're expecting you to be a good student, to fulfill all your student requirements, to ensure that you're showing that you're working towards completing your program, and of course that you are maintaining active contact with your DSO to ensure that you don't accidentally fall out of status if anything happens. So one question that we often get comes down to, how do you maintain student status, especially when you're looking at potentially going to the US and doing some work or practical training? We understand that a lot of students, especially college-age students, after they finish their 4-year degree in the US, they may look to potentially do an internship, or they may look to actually work for a year or so. This is a very specific kind of situation. And so we want to talk a little bit about that and ensure that you're aware of what that looks like. So the bottom line up front is that you can only work when you're authorized by a DSO in some cases, and in the large majority of cases, the DSO and the US Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, and others. So when do you need permission from one versus the other? Well, if you're going to do on-campus employment, then your DSO must approve, and there will be certain rules that will apply, including the amount of hours that you're actually able to work on campus. So again, if you're looking at on-campus employment, you're going to want to make sure you touch base with your DSO before you actually start working, even if it's on campus. What about off-campus employment? If it's off-campus employment, then you're going to need to have your DSO's approval, and then also USCIS will need to approve it. And there will be, again, specific rules that will apply, and they'll make sure that you are aware of both, and you'll need to abide by them. So when it comes to practical training or employment-based training, what exactly are we looking at? Well, we have two different kinds of practical training. And you'll probably become quite familiar with both of these if you end up doing your education in the US. One is called curricular practical training, or CPT. CPT happens during the program of study. And the way that CPT is looked at is it's probably an internship or some kind of practical training program that is considered an established part of your curriculum or plays some integral role or has some kind of relation to your major area of study. And so that would count as CPT. OPT, on the other hand, is usually during or following a program of study, and it's actually a form of temporary employment in the US that directly relates, again, to your program of study. So an internship may potentially be looked at more as CPT, but it's possible that it could also be OPT depending on the parameters of your employment, which is why it's really important that before you take any kind of trainings or internships or things that would fall into these different terminologies, that you talk to your DSO and that you also make sure that you touch base with USCIS. So if you choose to work without authorization, unfortunately, you will be forced to leave the United States immediately, and you could be in a situation where you could not be allowed to re-enter. So please make sure that you remember these guidelines and that you follow them if you go to the US. A really important point as well is you must take action, and it really is incumbent of you to maintain legal status in the United States or to depart the United States after you complete a program of study. So once you're getting close to completing your program of study, or once you have completed it, you will want to make sure that if you don't have any authorization for practical training, you depart the US within 60 days of the program end date, and no later than that. This is really important because if at any point in time you chose to go back for a master's or a PhD or anything else, we will be looking to ensure that you use your US student visa appropriately and that you departed on time in a timely manner from the US to return to Vietnam. So again, remember we've talked a lot about the DSO. When will you talk to your DSO? You should always try to speak to them first. And actually, since we're mentioning the DSO, we should mention that you will want to ensure that you speak with them whenever you're changing a major, a program, or a degree level. If you're changing your education level, you'll want to talk to them. If you're transferring to a new school or taking a leave of absence, and this is really important, if you're taking a leave of absence or taking a break from school for any reason whatsoever, that could be medical, that could be personal. If you're taking a break from school, if you're traveling outside of the US, if you're moving to a new address, so many different parameters, you'll want to ensure that you're talking to your DSO first. They should know and they should be able to also answer your questions regarding the legal requirements of your stay in the United States. Along the visa process, we may also ask you at the visa window to talk to your DSO if for any reason we see that there is information that is erroneous or incorrect in your I-20 form. So just be aware that a lot of times you will be in communication with your DSO first. So make sure that you know who they are and how to contact them, and that they know who you are so that they can also reach out to you if anything comes up. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about as well is student visa renewals. So going back to that first point in terms of once you have a visa and you are looking to renew it, to extend it, what do you do in that scenario? So not every single case requires an interview again. Sometimes you are eligible to submit your passport to us along with all the information that's required to look at your case by mail for a renewal. And that's really important. That would only happen for a renewal, not for a new case. For a new case, you would have to interview. Right now, US policy that is applicable until December 31st of 2020 says that if your visa expired within the past 24 months, then we're able to look at it as an inbox Dropbox renewal. So we would be able to receive it by mail. In addition to that, you would have to meet certain parameters for that to be valid. So if you're continuing with the same course of study or a new course of study, but at the same school, then we may also be able to look at your case by mail. You also must be present in Vietnam at the time that you're making the application if you're looking to do a mail renewal. The processing time can vary. We try to ensure that we spend no more than 8 to 10 business days processing those visas, but certain conditions may apply. So the best way to know if you are eligible for a student visa renewal by mail is to go to ustraveldocs.com/Vietnam and look at the conditions, look at our most recent policy, read it carefully and see if it may be applicable to your case now or to your case in the future. If you do choose to do a visa renewal application by mail, then we do have a couple of tips to ensure that we are able to process your visa in a timely manner. And the biggest one really is to ensure that we have access to your passport with the most current visa so that we can actually see if you're eligible based on when your visa expired. We will also need to see a valid I-20 form or DS 2019 form. We will also need to see your school transcripts. And that's really important. A lot of times we get these renewals and we don't see transcripts and then we have to call you in. So you want to make sure that we can see your transcripts, that you're following along with your program of study. And then of course, again, we'll need a photo. And again, it has to be within 6 months, no eyeglasses, white background, and it cannot be retouched. As we've mentioned before, regardless of how you're choosing to renew or apply for your visa, we always recommend to submit your application early. Because some applications could require additional administrative processing time, whether that means that we do need to ultimately talk to you and bring you in for an interview, or we need additional time to look at your case. So let's go a little bit over some final thoughts, and then we do have some time so we can actually take some questions. So the first thing I think should be clear to everybody is, of course, obey the law. Make sure that you are following the parameters of your student visa, that you're not misusing it, and that you are ensuring that you're following all the rules and regulations and ensuring that you come back to Vietnam. The second one, of course, work hard in school. Make sure that you're meeting all the requirements to actually graduate and to maintain F1 student status, with which already discussed. And lastly, the biggest thing to remember is that any questions about your status or any problem with your coursework, please talk to your DSO, again, your designated school official. You'll want to make sure that you maintain communication with them and that they're aware of any issues that you're having so that you don't fall out of status. And that's really all I have in terms of the presentation. We look forward to your questions. I also wanted to make sure that in this slide, you take a look and we have some additional websites and links that may help you if you have specific information. We have information on our website for non-immigrant visas. US Travel Docs is probably our best resource because it will tell you everything you need to know about our most up-to-date policies, as well as any kind of information about how to apply for a visa, the forms that you need, all of that will be there. If you do have specific visa case inquiries, only if you have actually applied for a visa or have a visa in processing, then you are able to use NIV or NIV contact inquiry form, which is on our website, and the link is there as well. For any guidance that you may be looking at around COVID-19 or entry in specific policies under COVID-19, we will direct you over to ICE. And there is an FAQ that has been shared publicly for international students that may have questions about their SEBI status, their student status, or any other question related to COVID-19. So with that, I'll go ahead and wait and we can get started with some questions. Okay, let's see here. All right, so let's see if we have some questions. I'm just going to pull up the chat. I'm not seeing the top questions. Here we go. Okay, so we received a question about tourist visas. We're not answering questions on tourist visas today. This is a presentation for student visas. If you have questions about tourist visas or any other kind of visas, we're directing you to our website, US Travel Docs. Go take a look there. Like I mentioned at the end, there's all kinds of questions. There's all kinds of information there for basic questions around how to apply for other kinds of visas. This is a tourist visa question. Okay. Let me take a look. I'm just reading over some of your questions. Yeah, we had a couple of questions that were the same around tourism visas. Again, go to ustraveldocs.com and find information there. It says here, we have a question. If I cancel my visa appointment because my school does not provide in-person classes, can I reserve the visa fee for my next visa appointment? Yes. So if you have had to cancel your visa appointment, and you're doing exactly what you should be doing. If your school is not providing in-person classes, there is not a need for you to travel. So then you don't necessarily need to interview right away. You are able to reuse that visa fee, the fee that you have paid, to request another visa appointment. There are specific guidelines to follow in terms of how long you can reuse that visa fee because you haven't used it for an interview. So again, you'll want to make sure that you go to US Travel Docs and take a look at how long you can actually use that visa fee. Is it a year?
It's a year. And they can cancel as many as 3 times. It's
typically about a year that you can use that visa fee if you haven't used it for an interview, and you can cancel up to 3 times. So you'll want to make sure that you're really careful as to how many times you're canceling your appointment as well. And just bear with me, y'all. I'm just trying to make sure that I get to see all your questions and read them. We received a question through our Facebook page in Ho Chi Minh City. It's about a very specific case. It talks about a visa refusal last week. I want to remind everybody right now, we are not going to discuss case-specific questions. For your safety and to protect your privacy, please do not put your personal information, your case information on the Facebook chat. Unfortunately, we are not discussing case-specific questions like that or addressing for people as to why they were refused. We're not really able to do that. Please remember, though, that if you are refused for a US visa, the officer will give you the parameters under which you were refused by US immigration and nationality law, and you are, as we mentioned in the presentation, you are capable of applying again. But of course, you want to make sure that you actually have changes in your personal circumstances or have additional or new information to provide for the next officer that will look at your case. The next question that we saw was, will gap years be a problem for students who want to apply for a student visa? That's a great question. So for us, we are going to look at your case once you come to the window and interview with us, and we will look at your case in the context that you presented to us. And so if you took a gap year and you tell us that you took a gap year, we may just have additional questions for you as to what you did during that gap year, or if it helped you, or what were your plans, or why you took the gap year. But ultimately, we're going to be more interested in the information around what makes you a credible student, and what are your plans to study in the US, and of course to return to Vietnam. So in terms of whether gap years would be a problem, none of your information as you presented to us, they're not problems. It just means that we may have more questions for you because we'll be curious about what you've been doing during that gap year. And so you should just be prepared to be able to talk about your life, what you've been doing, and anything else in relation to your student plans. I don't think I understand this question.
Oh, they're in studying in university in Vietnam.
Okay, so we have a question. I think this is what it means. If it doesn't, please make sure to clarify. It says studying university, currently applying for college in the US. Will it take effect for gift visa F1? I'm assuming what you mean in this case is that you are currently a student in Vietnam and you are hoping to eventually apply to college in the US and of course a student visa. We do see such cases. Again, we're mostly interested in understanding what your plans are and why you're trying to go and study to the US. And do your plans actually make sense for what you're telling us? So again, we're not going to, it's not like any specific life circumstances would make you automatically ineligible. Through your interview, we're going to try to understand your case and whether you are actually meeting the parameters and the requirements to apply for a US visa. Again, we'll remind people we are seeing still some questions that are being sent to us about very case-specific questions or personal questions about their own cases. Please don't provide those or send those through the Facebook comment section. Instead, we had the link in our US Embassy website has an NIV inquiry form. So make sure that you protect your personal information and go through those avenues to reach out to the Consulate General or to US Embassy Hanoi's consular section. Don't post your personal information on Facebook comments. Let's take a look here at more questions. See. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. Okay, so we have a question here and I'm going to read it and then we can talk a little bit about J1s. So it says, due to the proclamation in June, the J1 visa was placed on hold, but I heard that applicants who want to apply for the J1 intern or trainee program can schedule to interview with a few conditions. Is that true? If so, how do we schedule an appointment or request an emergency appointment? Thank you so much for that question. Again, probably one of the best resources for our applicants right now is our US Travel Docs website. If you go there, you will actually see that we have information right on the first page that talks about the different presidential proclamations and how they are applying to different visa categories. This doesn't just include the most immediate proclamations, but also any regional proclamations restricting travel. So I recommend that everybody makes sure that you go and check US Travel Docs. In this particular case, this applicant is inquiring about whether they can actually schedule appointments. I believe J1s can make appointments.
Yes.
But of course, please remember that there is still a presidential proclamation, and so there's only very specific cases under which eligibility for a visa would be allowed. So you'll want to, again, make sure that you read US Travel Docs very carefully and see if you are in one of those categories and whether you actually want to apply right now.
I would emphasize if it's a category that's going to be working, then it's not going to, it's very difficult for that to be approved. You have to check very carefully.
For us, mostly what we're looking at when we're looking at J1s right now is this a student category? If there is a work-related component, then your officer will have to look at it very carefully. But of course, there are presidential proclamation parameters that are currently in place. So eligibility may still be a question at the time of the interview. Again, eligibility is always determined at the time of the interview, but you want to make sure that you read things carefully and that you actually understand what categories are currently not being issued under the presidential proclamation. Okay, the next question is asking, this person said, I applied for a school that has a lot of Vietnamese people, a lot of Vietnamese students. Is this a problem for the purposes of a student visa? Would it result in a rejection? The answer for that is no. We are not looking at how many people from a specific country are going to a specific school. If you go back to our video that we looked in the beginning, we noted that there are no quotas for student visas. So we are not looking at the overall number of student visas that we are giving to just Vietnamese citizens. We are ultimately looking at your case and trying to determine if you are eligible for a US student visa. So we'll probably be looking to you to help us understand why you chose that school, and then also see if you meet the other parameters that we discussed during the presentation. There was a question here about, do I need to pay another SEVI fee if I take a gap year during my US education? Please make sure that you touch base with your DSO. Remember, we talked about ensuring that you're having communication with your school. Talk to your school because there'll be specific parameters as to whether you can continue with the SEVI that you have now. Hopefully they are aware that you've taken a gap year for your from your US education process and program. Apologies all, we're trying to make sure that we read all your questions, but I want to make sure that I don't miss any. So we have a question that says, I went to travel to the United States and visit some places before starting my college in August. Do I need to apply for another tourist visa or can I travel under my F1 student visa? So if you remember during the presentation, we mentioned that for an F1 student visa, if you are going for in-person study, you are not allowed to enter more than 30 days before the start of that program start date that would be on your I-20 form or your SEVI form. Remember, though, that ultimately the reason we're issuing the student visa is for you to go and study. So you'll want to be very careful about that. If you are deciding, for example, that you are going to enter the US or need to enter the US for tourism purposes more than 30 days before you begin the student, if you need to travel to the US for tourism purposes more than 30 days before your program start date, then you would want to see if you can get a tourism visa because you want to make sure that you're respecting the parameters of entry for your student visa. And that is very, very clear that it has to be no more than 30 days. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and make sure, again, as always, contact your DSO, make sure that they're aware of your plans. If you're looking to travel to the US, visit places before starting school, make sure that you're talking to them, that you are on track, that you're not missing anything, that you're not going to be late or miss your program start date. That's very important to ensure that you're staying on status. For questions around CPT and OPT, again, make sure that you're talking to your DSO. They will be best positioned to tell you if a specific plans or anything that you have fits the parameters. We did have one question here that talks about CPT during school. Can they still apply for OPT after graduation? Again, you're going to want to very specifically talk to your DSO and confirm that you are on CPT. And then you're going to want to talk to them about any OPT plans you have and make sure that they meet the parameters for OPT, that's something that can get approved for OPT, and they'll be best positioned to tell you how much time you will have, okay? So make sure that for questions around practical training, whether it is during the school year, during your program, or after your program, that you're talking to your DSO very carefully to ensure that they're aware of your plans and can help guide you. Sorry, we're just trying to make sure that we get all your questions. We were asked, are there any age limits to secure an F1 visa? There are no age limits for an F1 visa. Again, we've answered this question in different ways before, but what we're really trying to make sure we understand through your interview is what your plans are, and do your plans make sense for what you have decided for your education or career down the line, okay? And then we have I think that might be the last question that we have. Oh, sorry, maybe not. What if I get a visa already, but due to some reason I have to cancel my spring term and reapply for summer term? What should I do? This is probably the last question that we have time for today. If you are seeing that you are canceling your spring term for any reason, if you're deferring or if you're just not able to make it to school, we're going to reiterate this one more time. Please make sure that you contact your DSO as soon as possible, that your school is aware of your plans. If you have specific questions about this case and what that means, you'll want to make sure that your school has you on an active student status before you travel, and that they are updating your program start date or entry date to the US accordingly, which is why it's so important for your DSO to be aware of your plans and to know if you're having any difficulties entering the US. So please make sure that you touch base. If you're having this issue and you may not enter in spring term, you may have to go for summer, that you're talking to your DSO to ensure that your information is updated. And of course, you're always welcome to send the consular section, either in Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi, a message through our inquiry form to let us know that those plans have changed. And then we can be aware of that. But more importantly, out of all things, is to ensure that your DSO is aware and that they can confirm for you that your student status is still active and that your programs and what your program start date is in that system, because you will have to enter the US before then. I think that's all the questions that we have time for today. I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for tuning in. Thank you for your questions, and hopefully you will all consider applying to the US for school, and maybe we'll see you for your next visa interview. Have a great afternoon, everyone.